new and improved.
The moral of the story is to give things time. Sure, they may not work out in the short term, but over time, things work themselves out. And even if they don't, well, I guess there's always next year. They delayed it by a month. Yes, I have once again taken part in the yearly Love 2D Game Jam, and wow, this year was the biggest with the most participants they have ever had. Last year I aimed for the top 10 and managed to snag 6th place. So this year I decided to be a little bit more ambitious and see if I could get in the top 5. I'm sure that went well for me. So without further ado, let's get right into the gaming. So I woke up fresh and early Friday morning and prepared for the theme to be announced. This year was a little different from last year. Usually we get the theme about 24 hours beforehand, but this time we didn't. We had to come up with an idea during the jam, which makes a lot more sense.
Starting now, you will have 10 days to create a game using LÖVE with the optional theme Plan.
Plan? What a theme! So with the theme in hand and the clock ticking, me and William, who just so happened to be watching, came up with a few small ideas. I thought about making an event planning game where you have to fill a schedule with events where people have specific requirements for dates and times. William chimed in with some good suggestions, like an RPG where you have to plan your moves using specific rules, and as you go you need to refine your rules to defeat new foes but still being able to defeat older ones. But in the end, the idea I went for was a little bit more different. Day 1 was interesting. I decided to start off with the event planning idea. Don't get too attached to it. So I needed to get some kind of calendar where you could move events around. So I ended up making a calendar where you can add and move events. I even made it resizable and nothing was going wrong. But then I decided to take a step back and realise the concept wasn't very exciting and it would have to rely a lot on the art, sound and mood to rank higher, which I didn't really feel comfortable with, so I scrapped it. But it was only like 3 hours of work, so I didn't lose that much time. Do you remember that RPG idea that William came up with? Let's give that a go. I imagine it having a console-like aesthetic, so 1-bit colour, and the hardest part would be the event system, which I've made for other games in the past, so it really shouldn't be that hard. So I made some blocks for the event system, and oops, I already deleted everything. F*** me, wow. Let's make something more generic. Everyone loves Balatro, so let's make Balatro 2 with dice. So I started with this new idea that will surely stick around. Can you stop that? So I made some dice, added a roll button to re-roll the dice, added the hold mechanic so you could keep some dice frozen on the next roll, and the basic shop menu that shows you all the faces of the dice. I then started adding some functionality to the shop. You could now change the number of the faces and change what effect they have. I ended up making 3 different faces. The blue ones simply double the value on the dice. The red one multiplies it by the previous face's number. So if you had 2 6s and the second one was red, it would do 6 times 6 for 36. And the glass face would also trigger the face directly behind it. And then I hit a roadblock again. I don't know what was happening or why it was happening, but I just couldn't find my flow with this one. Maybe this whole game making thing doesn't really work for me anymore. What if I focused on a simple concept, play stuff and sit back as the player moves? It's the simplest idea, but it's also an idea that gives me at least a little bit of flexibility with what items I can add. Before I threw in the towel and dropped out of the jam, I was going to have one more go. Good morning, and let's not dilly or dally. I've got a platformer to make. I started out with my basic bump.lua platforming test, which already had some basic functions and classes I needed to make a player walk on some ground. Thanks bump.lua. So in order for you to be able to plan out your moves before the player starts walking, we need a way to control how the player walks. I decided to add some triggers that would control the way the player walks and when they jump. With the basic movement working, I started thinking about the art. I made this industrial looking border as well as this little guy for the character. But the triggers didn't really sit right with me, so instead I decided that maybe it would make more sense if they were actual objects. Like for jumping, having a spring that launches you in the air, or to turn around, simply having a crate that you can walk into and it turns the player around automatically. So I added a basic inventory and added the ability for objects to be placed in the world when the game was started, and before I could cancel this game again, I had a player jumping on a spring. Next I added some much needed variety with a falling crate and a floating platform. as well as adding the ability for items to only be placed in a specific range. And with that all done, I was finally able to give the game a fresh coat of paint. So now we had a proper background, tiles, items, and a nice looking new font. But how do I explain how the game works? I added a dialogue system, which would tell the player how to play. A bit buggy, but I'll fix it at some point. I ended off the day on a high with some custom button graphics, courtesy of my very cool UI library. I replace my UI library every year, so this one is bound to stick around. Day 3 is all about getting in the core gameplay. We need more things to interact with. Remember William Frog? Yeah, that guy with the Mario Zero stuff. When I mentioned the game, he gave me a really interesting list with a ton of different object ideas. I didn't get around to doing all of them, but I did add a few. First thing was some nasty spikes, just to put the player in his place. Next I added a cool menu. Then it was time for the doors and keys. The lack of an animation is unnerving, but it's a start. Then I added cool water. This was another one of William's ideas, except his water actually had a purpose, and mine was just there to look cool. God, it keeps crashing. I hope I fixed that. Don't even think about it. Stop. No more foreshadowing. God. And lastly, to end the day, I added an orb that allows the player to float while maintaining their initial velocity until they hit a wall or ceiling. Very neato. Day 4 wasn't a big day, but it did have a lot of changes to audio. Now instead of sounding like, it sounds like... Oh, right, I forgot. I started by finishing the menu. Very basic, but I didn't need it to do much at a time. Anyway, it now sounds like...
Sound.
With sound in the game now, we needed a way to turn that off. So I made the settings menu work. Anyway, to end off the day, I added a setting to skip all dialogue, so you can play the game in peace. Also worth mentioning, as I worked through making the settings and sounds work properly, I was also adding more levels. I was now up to level 9. This is all going pretty well. It'd be such a shame if something would bring it to a halt. Sadly, although I managed to get Friday and Monday off work, I couldn't afford to have any more time, so I now had about a third of the time I usually did during the day to work on the game. I continued to work on the levels as well as polishing the graphics and the code. I added the little guide to the main menu just to make it look a little bit more interesting. At least with this game, I never had to do any refactoring. That magnet code and reverse polarity, I still dream about it. Hey, DJ, turn it up. More levels. I added some music, and to be honest, it's probably the best music I've made for Game Jam. To be honest, it's probably the best music I've ever made for a Game Jam. Why can't I? And to be honest, it probably is the best music I've made for a game jam. It beats the sad music from Seismic, the silence in reverse polarity, and the weird music from Back Window. We now had teleporters. These were the last game objects I added. I added some better icons for the inventory, and oh look, the buttons have a drop shadow now. Just one of the amazing perks of my UI library. Point noted. You could now reset the save also, and with 12 levels done, we're almost at the finish line. I added colour options for the teleporter that was sadly never properly used. The white ones were used in one level, but the orange teleporters never saw the light of day in the base game. Speaking of unused objects, there was also this conveyor belt I started working on, but I sadly had to scrap it because it was hard to make both useful and just functional. It was very buggy and hard to implement into levels. This was exciting now. I finally had reached the last weekend, which means I can work on the game without work to distract me. But to be fair, I didn't really need it. For once, I'd actually used my time well. Even despite losing all of day 1 because I was struggling to come up with a good idea, I was in line for a pretty easy weekend. It was kind of refreshing not having to worry as I made the last 2 levels I needed to make. Cleaned up some of the UI, including removing those awful drop shadows on the menu. And in general, I just kind of had the time to give everything a final once over. No mad dash to make core features, no missing levels, It was all done on day 10 and with plenty of time to give it a good playtest to make sure I did a good job. I ended up scrapping and redoing the entirety of level 15 and I had time to set up all the branding and the itch.io page, link everything and submit well in advance. It felt really good. But still, I'd thought all week about how much of a failure I am for even wasting my time on this. Day 1 really affected me throughout the jam. I wish I didn't have to start over and show people that not everything I do is perfect. As I started rating all the games, I saw what other people made and how much better they were. Kinda ate away at me. I was a bit disappointed in myself, to be honest. Still, there were some great games this year. Train Planner was really cozy and I love the gameplay. Happy it got first place. Can We Reschedule was really cool, really interesting gameplay, and I definitely wasted jam voting time on this game. Rabbit with a Gun, because Rabbit with a Gun. But I think my favourite this year was... Oh no, I was reborn in this world where I have to save a mermaid princess on an alicorn. Or just mermaid princess. Well deserved third place. But what about my game? Did I reach the top 5? Well, I was kind of dreading it, to be honest. I knew in my mind I barely deserved 21st place, like the first year I partook. But I had to have a look first, and I got 2nd place. How can this be? Well, the truth is that I'm just really bad with dealing with stress, and during the end of the jam I was so overwhelmed that I was just thinking negatively for no reason. Playing the game now and I'm like, yo, this shit is fire. And even if I got 50th place, there's always next year. Wait, if every year so far I've gotten better results, that would mean that for next year, the only way I could improve is if I got 1st place. Well, it looks like I know what I'm doing next year. I think I'm going to need a team. Foreshadowing guy. Yeah, you can come back now. I kind of need you. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you partook in the game jam this year, congratulations. I think you should give yourself a massive pat on the back. Anyway, I'll see you all next year. Unless you actually like Moray Zero, in which case, I'm stuck here.